I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 is sponsored by Cardinals Special Events. Jay Nixon was governor of Missouri from 2009 to 2017, and he continues to take a keen interest in matters of both the state and the St. Louis region, which he now calls home. He was the last Democrat to serve as Missouri governor, yet even as state offices are held entirely by Republicans, he retains his optimism for his party's future prospects. He sat down with me last week to share his thoughts on the challenges facing new Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe, what the state could do if it wanted to get serious about tackling crime in St. Louis and Kansas City, and why he thinks the Democratic Party still has a future in Missouri, despite all current evidence. Governor Jay Nixon, welcome.
It's great to be here, Sarah. Thank you.
So I really appreciate you coming to talk to us. But I start by asking about the one thing everyone in St. Louis is talking about right now, and that's the way the city's plans to spend the money it earned from the NFL and that legal settlement over the Rams has fallen apart. Now, when you were governor, you kind of laid the groundwork for that claim, and your firm Dow Bennett helped bring that money back to St. Louis. I want to note that you walled yourself off, no compensation from that. But what do you make about that plan falling apart at the Board of Aldermen?
It's very interesting to put in the paper, but I think the money is still there and they're going to be fine long run. You're seeing democracy in real time. You're seeing the fights that happen behind closed doors happen in public. That's all. I don't think people should get overly concerned or overly worried about it. Obviously, government needs to work more efficiently sometimes, but they are sincere in their differences of opinion. And when you get into democracy and there's sincere differences of opinion, and we shouldn't then be political consultants to say what to do. We ought to give our input. It's a positive thing, and I don't want to make it negative.
So you don't really see that as a failure. You see that as this is how the process should work.
The money's still there. It's gathering interest right now. I've seen failures. Failures is when the money is spent wrong or the money is gone. And that's neither of those things have happened here.
Yeah, I think that's some good perspective. Now, I want to switch to talk about Jefferson City because we have a brand new governor in Jefferson City. Governor Mike Kehoe, he gave his first State of the State address this past month. Did you watch?
Yes, I did. I stay in touch.
So what did you think as you were watching him outline his priorities, his plans?
First of all, I wish him the best. There's only a limited number of us former governors, and we try to work together and help each other where we can. And so I'm not going to be critical. I think the audience needs to know I'm not going to hear, and not that the governor and I will always agree. We didn't when he was a state senator. We didn't when he was lieutenant governor, but that's neither here nor there. We're good to have a great relationship, and he's a good guy. He understands the process. I think he's got a number of challenges ahead. They're more longer-term challenges rather than short-term challenges. I was very heartened by his tone at the beginning of the address because these days sometimes you hear the continued partisanship played out, especially federally, where every comment is a political comment. I'm not saying there's not politics involved with what Governor Kehoe said, but I thought he began the comments by laying out that he wanted to work with everyone. He thought there were things to do together. And that language has been sorely missing from much of the political discourse, and I don't think it's going to be missing with him.
So he took kind of that nonpartisan tone, and yet there's another divide in the state of Missouri where I think so many St. Louisans these days feel like state government is downright hostile to their success. Do you think it's fair for people in the city and in county to feel that way?
Well, when a person is elected that didn't need St. Louis or Kansas City to get elected, then things like, then in essence, he's reacting to the constituents, the electors that elected him. But I think that as we look forward, I think that St. Louis and Kansas City need to play a more significant role. And I think that Kehoe being from here, there's a chance that will connect that divide. And I think that in that job, you're the cheerleader for the state. You don't say bad things about your cities. You don't say bad things about your state. And so I'm hopeful that as they move forward, he'll do that. I think he's sincere in what he wants to do. But once again, the things I'm critical of will not be shared on the podcast with Sarah Fensky.
Fair.
Today.
What do you think a governor could do right now to sort of heal some of those bad feelings with St. Louis?
Well, I think that part of the problem, Sarah, is everybody's analyzing this like it's a political thing. we need to get into the issues. We need to get into the substance. Where do we need to take the state? Where do we need to take the region? Not what was a fight yesterday with two aldermen yelling at each other, or a overly partisan thing of this in Jeff City, or they're saying this and that. Where do we need to go? For example, on crime. I mean, yeah, appointing somebody to the police board, if that's what they want to do, and in essence take over that sense, fine. I've served with it in both ways.
You don't see that as a game changer either way?
I don't think it'll fundamentally change I appointed people on the police board, and it switched to local control while I was governor by the vote. Crime issues are much more deep in a community than merely a board that hires a chief. And I don't have a problem with the chief. I think they got a good chief. And so I look at part of my deal now is to not look at things, what's happening today and tomorrow, but to try to look out, look farther out. And in my sense, in St. Louis, obviously you got to deal with the crime issue. My sense is the long-term view is to deal with younger folks. And one easy way to begin that process is a full understanding of the juvenile court system. Most of the folks that are getting in felonious problems have graduated from our juvenile court system. And in the early 90s, when I was Attorney General, we rewrote that code because of some determinative sentencing. So I could bore you with the law part. I don't want to do that. Other than to say it's a good time to look at it again, because if you have a customer, a kid with trouble, come into your system, and then when they graduate, they become a felon, that's not really a success. And it's hard. You got privacy issues, you got child issues, you got school issues. These are really difficult. And I'd like to see some of the minds look at issues like that, broader issues about what we can do to deal with it, and quit dealing with all these numbers. I mean, St. Louis is saying, we got it down to only 150 murders last year. Well, county only had 30 something, but
so that's not necessarily a point to brag about for the city.
Well, I never talked about crime like that because it affects individual people and communities. And what you want to do is not solve the crime problem, but solve the safety problem. If people feel safe where they're going, then you don't have a crime problem.
Yeah.
And so you've got to go to the deeper, bigger issues if you're going to get the long-term solution in these situations. And so I'd like to see some of the party in Jeff City that's so critical of Kansas City and St. Louis start, instead of just being commentators as to what is wrong, begin to be participants in what is right. I mean, we saw that in a small way with the removal of Kim Gardner and the appointment of my former law partner, Gabe Gore, as circuit attorney. These things, it's making a difference. Ask any cop. I mean, they turn reports in, things actually happen, So you can make these changes, and there are some of them smaller than others, but thinking in terms of how do we make it better rather than how do we score points by making it bad. Sound bad.
So you mentioned specifically that juvenile court system, and the state runs the courts. So that's something where the state could have a big impact. What could a governor do there to try to help with the recidivism, to get these young people that are getting in that system on a better track?
What you can do is appoint a high-level group of people to help you look at these issues so that you can have informed, folks that have an opinion, but you got to set some standards for them. We did sort of things like that in the Tax Credit Review Commission, where we reviewed all the tax credits. I had a bunch of people that really knew what they were doing, helping us, giving us a report, and then working with us to get legislation passed and things like that. So I think you're a two-step process. You have to understand the problem, get the solutions worked out. And yes, it's difficult with the courts, and especially with kids, because you've got a lot of privacy issues. But for example, one of the reasons we got involved in the 90s was that because at that time, the juvenile code allowed, once you turned 17, you got a jail-free card and your record was wiped free. Well, that meant 16-year-olds were really valuable to gangbangers selling drugs, because they could go sell drugs, and no matter what happened to them, at 17, they got a free start.
Yeah.
So we changed that into what's called determinative sentencing. So the court carried jurisdiction beyond just that 1 year. That's a very technical one thing, but there's more places like that where you can make a difference. So once again, I don't come at this trying to be critical of the courts. I'm just saying that's when you have a problem with criminals and over 95% of them engage with the criminal justice system at a place first, then I think you ought to look at that place and see what you can do to have them not engage on. So you got to get good brains together. You got to get an open process, and you have to be willing to make the tough calls, because we called ours the Get Tough policy. When I helped host a national juvenile crime summit in California with the California AG a number of years ago, we brought in a bunch of people, and we found that especially with kids, if they had committed an offense or done something bad, it wasn't necessarily the length of punishment you gave them. It was the sureness that there would be accountability.
That's interesting.
Your parents, you don't say, if you don't clean your room, I'm going to give you the death penalty. Yeah.
Never. No, never say that.
No, I mean, no, you know what I mean? And so knowing that mom cares is what matters. If mom cares and you don't want her to say anything, you want to do the work, or at least theoretically. So I think that accountability is getting out of that system. And in some ways, because it's you're having too many make it through and keep getting worse.
Yeah. It's interesting with all the talk about crime in St. Louis and Kansas City. This is just something that's not on the radar.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
This is not the easy stuff of government. You don't just get a consent bill and pass it. You've got ongoing cases. You've got people's rights. You've got parental involvement. You've got all sorts of stuff. It's a complicated. I don't mean to say it's simple. I remember like yesterday, though, we were coming forward with it, and the Clergy Coalition in St. Louis wanted to meet with me. I was Attorney General at the time. And I was a little concerned about that. The policy was called Get Tough Policy. We were going to be tougher on kids, okay? We just were. And so the Clergy Coalition wanted to meet with me. So I said, okay. And they came to the AG's office, drove up from St. Louis. And I was a little jumpy before the meeting, not knowing if I was just going to go get yelled at or whatever. And I went in and sat down with a couple of my folks. And the leader of the organization leaned across and said, you may be worried that we're going to be upset, but around this table, it's more people that have preached at the funerals of young people than any other table you're ever going to be around in the world. Okay. And if something you're doing is going to make fewer of those, then we want to help.
Wow.
And I think I think we've gotten stuck in the political discussion about what's your rights or what color are you or what's the cops say or what's the video look like and all that sort of stuff. These are people. This is our lives. And so I think that the public is ready to look at some of this. Once again, it's easy for me to sit here as a former governor and assign people to do something that would take hundreds of hours and pass a bill and pass by one vote and all that sort of stuff. I'm just saying that is an area that focusing on the outcomes, I think would do everybody a lot of good.
You also mentioned that there are some big challenges that are looming for the state of Missouri, and that these are longer-term challenges that Governor Kehoe may have to confront, or maybe his successor will be confronting. What do you see as those big challenges?
Biden bucks are ending. This is money that no Republican voted for, that was delivered to Missouri by a Democratic president, and that's fine. It's money. It's money in the bank. But it's a one-time infusion, especially with the tax cutting fever that's going on and the efforts at the federal level to rein in the budget. The line that comes from Fed dollars is going to get smaller. And when you have instituted already a number of longer-term tax cuts, you're going to have fiscal issues that arise sooner rather than later, 3 and 4 years. So really significant.
That federal spigot is turning off. The state is still talking about cutting taxes, even in light of that. Do you think they're in denial about the impact of that federal money going away?
When you have term limits, denial only lasts 2 years, Well, seriously, with a term limit situation, they're worried about their next election or whatever on the legislature side. It's reality, whether they understand it or not. I think that there are a number of issues to be dealt with, but the finances shouldn't be forgotten because unlike the federal government, which if they run into finance problems, they borrow, states can't do that. Governor Kehoe's got his eye on this. He does. When I talk to him, I don't ever say what you say to a governor, but I think he's got his eye on it. He's a mature guy, and the budget staff is strong and good and honest and hardworking people. So I think that dealing with that sooner rather than later makes it easier. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying. And playing games and overly cutting taxes is a dangerous play.
So one other factor for Missouri these days, Ness Sandoval, who is a professor at St. Louis University who studies demographics, he says Missouri is entering into demographic winter, more people dying than being born, and especially with immigration numbers likely to fall. Missouri already wasn't doing a great job of getting a ton of immigration. Do you think that's going to be a problem, a concern for the state going forward?
Yeah, and St. Louis is not the only place that's happening. When you look at the country, we're within 12 or 13 years of having more deaths than births as a country. And so for us here, it kind of changes. If I was looking at something that was old school that needs to change to new school, it would be economic development, who bases a lot of their dollars they put forward and incentives based on new people, new jobs, new things. I think you're going to switch to a model of growing what you got and then shifting to an economic model where neighborhoods become more important than big city downtowns. I'm a big walkable city guy. I think you build your cities and your regions by neighborhoods. Look at St. Louis, dog, whatever. Pick a place you can walk to church, walk to the store, walk to this and that. I think all of those things are what's going to come, which is much, much different than we are now. So as far as the population, I think it provides St. Louis a great opportunity because the town was 1 million, the city, when all these great amenities were built. Now we're 275 or 280, whatever it is. It means there's lots of room at the Muni. That means the park is great. I think, so I wouldn't be as concerned about upping population. I would be much more concerned about taking the population that is here and giving them the opportunities to succeed. But it's a demographic reality. Sandoval's right. Those numbers, he tries to sugarcoat. The last presentation, I tried to sugarcoat it at the end, like things will be okay, but the numbers don't say that.
He wants to give people that moment of hope.
He wants to get invited back, you know.
But you're kind of finding that moment of hope. You're saying, hey, we can win on the quality of life.
Yeah, we've got to. I mean, you got to change how you think about it. It's not a contest to see how many people we can get to move here anymore, because that's not happening anywhere. The places are growing are not growing because there's some strategy to do it. They're growing because of where they are and what's going on. If Tesla moves its HQ to Texas, then some people will move. Okay, that I understand that. But I do think that changing the mentality of upping the quality of life here, both economically, fun, all the stuff you do, is going to be more important to the region long run than how many people are in line at Starbucks in Clayton.
This is the 314 podcast, and we're talking today to former Missouri Governor Jay Nixon. He was governor from 2009 to 2017. He's now an attorney in private practice at the firm Dowd Bennett. Looking for an exciting event space for a rehearsal dinner, fundraiser, corporate function, or something in between? Bring your group to Busch Stadium for a uniquely St. Louis venue. Cardinals Special Events will help you hit your event out of the park. Visit cardinals.com/events for more information today. And now back to our conversation with former Governor Jay Nixon. Switching gears here, going from the state to the party.
Right.
Your party, the Missouri Democratic Party, they're somewhat in tatters at this point. There's no statewide elected officials who are Democrats. The party really wasn't even competitive in any of these races. What do you think went wrong?
Well, first of all, I've been through this. In 1988, I was the Democratic nominee for the United States Senate running against Jack Danforth. And he beat me by over 600,000 votes. Because I remember, because in 1996, when I was reelected as Attorney General, my press people came in and said, you got more votes today than anybody's ever gotten running for office statewide in Missouri. Should we say something about that? And I said, I don't think so. And they said, why is that? I said, because in 1988, when I ran for U.S. Senate, I got the fewest number of votes. Coupled that with, so you look at 1992.
Yeah.
In 1988, we were at the bottom in that sense. And in 1992, we swept it. So the politics has changed more than the people in Missouri. If I was going to say one thing that people, everything's getting analyzed politically now. I'm very aware that there are issues and challenges. But they're demographically nationwide, not just Missouri. The Democratic Party has got the same issues in many other Midwestern states that it has here. I am marginally, more than marginally, I am optimistic about the future, though, because the other party has decided for somehow that one of their positions is that environmental matters are a hoax. And to young folks, that is not right. In fact, it's insane. And so I think if we can continue to, the Democratic Party is going to come back with young folks and women, both good demographics for us, both ones we're going to gain on. And the women are the smarter voters, always looking for them. The younger folks, sick and tired of the way things are going. And I think both of those are growth areas for us. And the first question you had about what the Jeff City people are saying about St. Louis and Kansas City. That also should provide an advantage to statewide candidates that are running. But I think
How so? How would that? How does St. Louis or Kansas City help there?
Because if you can dominate St. Louis and Kansas City, it matters much less what happens in Grundy County.
Yeah.
There's a lot more people.
Yeah.
I mean, when Warren Hearns won the Democratic nomination for governor, he only carried 3 counties in the state. 3 are St. Louis, Kansas City, and one of the counties in the Boot Hill. He was run down by Charleston. There's numbers there. The population we're losing in Missouri is being lost in the rural areas, not in the cities. I mean, the city, some of them are dropping a little, but the region here is stable.
Yeah.
So I think demographically, younger people and women are going to combine to help us build, a new coalition to at least counter the oligarchs.
So you had signed on to the No Labels movement that wanted to run an independent candidate for president. Do you feel like the Democratic Party label is so toxic in places like rural Missouri that we almost need this alternative?
See, I'll answer that, but I want to talk about the toxic part. One of the problems of interviewing me on this sort of stuff is, I had 2/3 of the opposite party in both the House and the Senate the entire time I was up.
Yeah.
I held over 150 vetoes, held them. Okay. So there's a part of me that says I did it, somebody else can do it. I think it can be done. One of my law partners is Jack Danforth, who in 1976, nobody thought the Republicans had any chance. So Jack gets elected, attorney general, and the rest is history. So I think these movements are clearly there, and people are a lot less loyal to their party anyway. So my thing is, people need to talk about stuff that matters. They need to talk about issues. They need to talk about plans. They need to talk about where the state should go. Here we're in a situation where, for the first time in recent memory, the foundation formula is not going to be fully funded. But on the other side, they're putting $50 million into a tax credit program for schools. What is our education policy as we look forward? Get substantive and get specific about what you can do. And so I think there is carved in the marble of the Capitol, when there is no vision, the people perish. If I was going to give one piece of advice to the Democrats, have some vision.
Yeah.
Say where you want to go.
And you
Not what you want to protest, not what you're against, not what you're critical of, not how they're doing it wrong on the other side. What do we want to do?
Yeah. Do you feel like education is a big winning issue for Democrats?
I think that people are losing faith dramatically in all sorts of public institutions. So that's the other thing. That's one of the reasons I feel good about Governor Kehoe, because I think he understands the institutions that are important to the Department of Revenue. They got to get your tax refund back. The Department of Public Safety, they got to do what they do. The corrections, they got to keep them in, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that this disengagement from the public in respect for the institutions, the post office, my gosh, it's like we're down. How can you be down on the post office? I mean, Benjamin Franklin's turned over in his grave, and so I think that rebuilding the important institutions after they're cut because of the finances is a place where the Democrats can be of huge impact. We used to have a whole bunch of underground storage tanks in Missouri from gas stations that had gas in them or pollute. So a long time ago, Wayne Good, a great senator, and I passed a bill to establish a petroleum storage tank fund to clean them all up. So we've put a situation where there's an insurance fund, they paid in. 30 years later, there's none. All the tanks have been cleaned up.
Wow.
No tax increase from anybody. Look at what we did on trash. We put together the flow control so that trash that comes from here goes to the landfills that are very good landfills. And they're regionally, the flow control, where the trash goes, is a hard political issue. But we're dealing with our trash in the state really, really well because of some thoughtful long-term policy decisions made by thoughtful people in Jeff City. So I think there's still huge avenues if the people that are involved in it get the rush from doing good as opposed to get the rush from just winning an election. The over-politicization scares me more than the policy stuff.
Yeah, and that feels like it's such a thing right now that you almost can't even talk to people about something common sense like let's get rid of the underground storage tanks because people want to fight the culture wars. It's got to be hard, though, for Democrats right now to try to do these common sense sort of things that you specialized in because they don't own any of these state offices. It's hard to get that foothold.
Good ideas can really go. You know that. You're a journalist. You've seen good ideas grow from an idea to policy to success. And they just need to have a confidence in it and be, well, is this going to turn an election around tomorrow? Are people going to say I'm voting because somebody figured out how the trash moves? I don't think it's going to show up on a high on the polling list as to why you're voting for your state rep or state senator. But electing people to take that responsibility seriously and take the institutions that they're running seriously and support them can begin to turn the tide and reinstitute some of this respect that's necessary to get public action. This is not a short-term fix.
So many Democrats right now, I think, are just wanting to like go into a bunker because they're so upset about everything that's happening in Washington, D.C. They're so angry about what Trump is doing. What gives you that hope where it sounds like you're looking at the long game? You're not just going to hide for the next 4 years.
Well, because he's not totally wrong. The budget's out of control. I mean, I'm you know me, I'm big on balancing budgets. Okay,
Yeah.
I always have. That's one of the reasons I got involved with No Labels, because they were very fiscally conservative on the spending side. I was just thinking, I never could take tax dollars from people and waste it or not do something with it, and I only wanted the amount that we needed. But our fiscal house is really not in order as a country, and this is going to come crashing forward very quickly, not just in the debt limit stuff. And so for Democrats, it's like, try to find some things you can agree with them on.
Yeah.
And one of those would be, we should only spend the money that we send you. How about we try that? Just being blanket saying that that the Democrats are against anything with DJT's initials on it. How'd that work out first time? Felt pretty good to go to all those rallies and everybody raise their hand and yell and scream. But somebody said this morning, I mean, he's baiting the Democrats. How much do you think people want to take, if they don't want to take their tax dollars and do something, how much do you think they want to send it to, Nigeria today? Who are you going to walk into out here in Maplewood that'll say, boy, aren't you happy we're sending money down to give popsicles to sick kids in Uganda? And they're like, what are you talking about? So it's not an especially popular political position to take. That's why you need to be thoughtful and have morals and have values around it. I just wouldn't take the bait with him, is all I'm saying. I'm not saying I would agree, but I think we are too easy to take the bait, and the media is very excited about making that bait as tasty as possible, so as to give politicians a chance to take the other side of it. So we're not at a high water mark of democracy right now. I don't mean to in any way, shape, be the guy from another planet that says it's all good. Don't worry, we got this on rails. These are some very, very difficult and dangerous things they're talking about doing, especially from the law perspective, which does concern me. But I think the Democrats need to find things that they can agree with and make better in that same zone, because anything that the president and his people are saying generally is pretty popular. But they're not picking these fights on accident.
So we've talked about some really meaty issues today. We've
Right.
talked about national politics, state politics. In our final couple minutes here, I want to bring it a little lighter to an issue that I know
Sure.
is very close to your heart. You are such a supporter of the Missouri outdoors,
Absolutely.
conservation and the parks. And I know you love to get out there and get outside. What's one place in Missouri that more of us should be visiting?
Well, I mean, everybody should go to Echo Bluff State Park because it's a jumping off spot. That's why we built it there. It's a great accommodation. Have you ever been there? It's great accommodations, and there's some good, there's 6 world-class springs within 20 minutes of it. It's right in the heart of the Ozarks.
This is something you did as governor, was
Yeah.
make that state park.
Yes. The lodge there, the Betty Lee Lodge, is named after my mother. I was in the room when we bought the property and developed that. I'm very proud of that. It's a jumping off spot. It's not like just that park's the only place, but if you want to see a region, even in bad weather, you can stay in your cabin or whatever and go out and look at it. That's a good place, and it's accessible from here. Although when you're driving the last 20 minutes on Highway 19, please don't go fast. It's a part of our state that hasn't invented shoulders on roads yet.
So you feel a little danger.
Yeah, and there's log trucks. There's log trucks.
Oh, right. Okay, that's
So,
good warning.
so when you're getting there, you just go easy. The last 15 miles, just go take your time. I think there's also some stuff in. I'm staying on this side of the state a little bit more.
Yeah.
In times of the year Wakanda Park up in the north of the state, right on the Mississippi River. There is some bird sighting capacity there that's just pretty incredible. I mean, I like the bird stuff where Missouri and Mississippi meet, but up at Wakanda, you're getting the birds a little earlier, and there's some better sites for them. It's way up there, but it's nice to be able to look on your thing and say these birds are coming tomorrow, and go up there and see them, and see them come through your state and see them live and real and whatnot. So I think Wakanda's a good park. I found it moving to go down to Cape Girardeau to their park there, the one just south of town where the Trail of Tears went through. It's just one of those things that I think people in Missouri have separated themselves from realizing what a significant, horrific role we were involved in there. You think about it, you stand over that river and look at people like swimming or walking across it in the winter and thousands of people dying. I just think some of that, and it's a good park too. You've got places to hike there and all that sort of stuff. But I think sometimes with parks, not only do you get the outdoors, you can get a sense of what was here before, and that is one that I think is worth it. I can go, and plus you got to go by Elephant Rocks and Johnson Shut-ins to get there. So you're gonna. There's plenty down there, and that's another reason why I like Echo Bluff, because you can get to Johnson Shut, JSI, you can get to the other ones. New cabins coming in. We stayed at them before they were open down there.
I love that you've just kind of created this whole road trip for people listening here.
Yeah.
That's great. I wonder if part of how you're able to sort of maintain your optimism, even with everything happening in the state and in the world, is because you do make that point of going out to touch nature.
I think it's really important. For me, it always has been. I find peace in the outdoors. It's a contemplative place. And as Aldo Leopold said in one of his writings, the great thing about being in the outdoors is before dawn, there's no property lines. You can walk around and see stuff.
Yeah.
And so I like the freedom of moving. And then Georgiana and I have taken up of our long distance trekking is what we do now. That's our new sport. We did the Tour de Mont Blanc, which is 135 miles around the largest mountain in Europe. We did Cornwall. We did Ireland. And so it's calming to me. And as you can tell, things that are calming to me, people around me like me to do.
Well, Governor Jay Nixon, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
That was former Missouri Governor Jay Nixon, who sat down with me last week. And joining me now with some perspective on another big story this week is St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, great to be here.
So aldermanic dysfunction has been in the news, but Governor Nixon isn't feeling so negative. And I understand neither are you.
Yeah, and maybe not because of anything to do with the Rams bill, but there are some problems in the city that have, bedeviled us even longer than, what to do with the Rams money. And one of those is what to do with all the vacant and derelict properties in the city. And, I think on Tuesday, the alderman made some really concrete progress and, hopefully solving that problem.
Okay, so this problem, how big is this problem?
Yeah, it's pretty big. I mean, St. Louis was kind of famously once home to 800,000 people. Now there's about 300,000 folks living in the city. So that's left quite a few vacant properties, rundown properties. Numbers differ, but some people say there could be like as many as 100,000 problem properties in the city, or like something like a quarter of the city's housing stock. I mean, it depends on how you measure things, but it's a big problem.
Okay, so the city wanted to do tougher fines for people who own those properties, and that was something that city voters had approved, and the alderman just sort of picked up that baton.
Yeah, so if you recall in November, there was Proposition V to amend the city's charter. That basically, changed the charter so that if the city wanted to, they could raise fines on folks whose, properties fall into, disrepair and disarray, neglect. But just because the city could do it doesn't mean that in addition to that charter reform, there had to be an ordinance passed, specific laws, and those were passed on Tuesday.
The idea here is that rundown buildings, this is not people living in poverty. This is not just a matter of neglect, that these are some mostly out-of-town type owners.
Yeah, so the ordinances have been written very specifically to target folks who are letting properties they don't live in sort of fall into disrepair. So it's the phrase they use is non-owner occupied. So if you're living in the house and you just can't keep up with like the grass or the gutters or whatever, this doesn't apply to you. But if you're like an out-of-town LLC that maybe had great, visions for redevelopment and you bought like a whole, dozens of houses and then the financing fell through or whatever, and you're just kind of letting those sit, hoping for a miracle to happen. But meanwhile, people are breaking into them, that kind of thing. This is targeted at those entities. And up until these changes took place, actually, like in a lot of cases, like the biggest fine the city could hit these people with was like $25, which was just kind of considered the cost of doing business for a lot of these folks.
That's barely the cost of doing business. I'm not even going to bother paying that. That's a parking ticket.
Exactly. So now it depends on what the kind of infraction is. But in some cases, it's as much as like $500, which some people say is still, a little bit low, but it's a step in the right direction.
So you mentioned they're bringing the fines for building code violations. They were as low as $25. They're bringing those up. What else of these bills that they passed on Tuesday? What else is all included in this?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things, and because there's 3 bills, and the idea was like the Board of Aldermen wanted to be a little bit symbolic. So there's 3 bills, one sponsored by an alder from South City, one from Midtown, a Central Corridor, one from North City. So it's like these vacant properties, derelict properties are an issue all over the city. So we're going to have a kind of citywide approach here. Other things that became law, one of them is that if you tear down a building without the proper permits, you can actually be assessed either $30,000 or half of the assessed value of that property, which is a pretty steep fine. And Paul McKeeve, sort of a name who will be familiar to some, was very famously accused of doing this relatively recently. So it was kind of that specific ordinance was written with him in mind, I think.
Yeah, this is the developer who bought up so much land on the north side, just kind of let it rot. There were a lot of complaints that maybe he was not doing his demolitions by the book. So if that were the case, this would hold him accountable for that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other big thing that changed is that instead of just the city, sending you a notice saying that, hey, you violated this building code, you owe this money, the fines that are owed can actually now be added to your tax bill. So there's all these mechanisms to force people to pay their taxes, which now can kind of be marshaled against people who have these rundown properties.
So the city's looking at this as a way to get these buildings back into good shape, but this could actually generate a decent amount of money. Where is the money going to go?
Yeah, but to your point about a decent amount of money, at least one alderwoman said that by someone's estimate, I don't know who, there's maybe like $21 million in outstanding fines that have been assessed but not collected. So yeah, there's a huge pot of money that is out there, at least in theory. Some of the money that's collected will go to the Impacted Tenants Fund, which is for renters who have like a derelict landlord and are having issues with them, and to help support them. Some of the other money, though, is going to go to hire new folks at the city councilor's office, who then can sort of use the legal system, use the court system to go out and get some of that $21 million. In theory, those jobs will pay for themselves and also sort of be a net revenue generator for the city.
So the city might be in the business of trying to actually collect, which historically hasn't really been that proactive about. At the same time, you've got some private actors who've been using these nuisance property laws, proactively targeting these same kind of out-of-town landlords. I'm thinking about Peter Hoffman. He's with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri.
Yeah.
So what kind of successes have they had trying to go after these same type of property owners?
Quite a bit of success. Basically, the nuisance laws in the state allow anyone who lives within a certain proximity to a property that if a judge declares that property a nuisance, you, the neighbor, are entitled to some kind of remedy. Either you might get, in some sort of rare cases, you can actually get some sort of monetary sort of compensation. But usually what happens is that the judge will force the property owner to fix the property, sort of remedy the nuisance, or give it to a receiver, give it to someone else who will. And the nuisance laws are a little bit interesting in the state, where if you're like a neighborhood association, you can file a suit based on any property within sort of your boundaries. Or in the city, if you just happen to live within, I think it's maybe like 100 yards or something, relatively close to a property that is sort of actively reducing your quality of life, you're allowed to file suit. So Peter Hoffman, who you mentioned, he basically, because not everyone has the legal resources to like file those lawsuits, they'll basically be the legal representation for, the neighbor or the neighborhood association and go about getting those, nuisances remedied. And I don't recall the exact numbers, but every year there's like dozens of houses that they kind of get out of the hands of bad actors into the hands of developers. And they actually, every year they put out this booklet of like before and after photos. And it's just really cool to kind of see the sort of tangible successes that they kind of get on the board every year.
So you have this nonprofit entity doing this work. The city's now putting some muscle behind it. Do you think we're finally going to see a dent made in some of these problem properties?
Yeah, well, there's a very big, dent sort of already in existence, right? Because there's so many, problem properties. But yeah, this should at least give the city like a significant number of sort of sticks or like tools in their toolkit or whatever sort of turn of phrase you want to use to kind of go after this. Whereas before they were having to go through municipal courts. And if you were a property owner, you're just someone who can't pay their bill, you get hit with like a summons to muni court. You probably show up, maybe you kind of remedy the situation. But if you're like an LLC in Texas or Singapore or something, you're not going to show up to St. Louis Municipal Court. So this gives the city like an avenue outside of the muni court system to, hopefully take care of some of these problems. So there's reason for optimism. I mean, we'll see. But yeah, I think it was whenever the alders were sort of passing this and they kept saying it's a great day in St. Louis, and they're politicians. But I think they were onto something there. So.
I like this. I like there's some cause for optimism. Ryan Kroll, staff writer at St. Louis Magazine. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Sarah Fensky, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me every day in your inbox, thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is the 314. See you next time.